I knew she was going to die. I didn't know her name, had never seen her before that moment, but the second I laid eyes on her, I knew. She was sitting alone at the bus stop, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the thing standing behind her. A dark figure. Tall, thin, almost human but not quite. It didn't move, didn't breathe. Just stood there, its head slightly tilted as if whispering something into her ear. No one else saw it. I knew what was coming next. I had seen it before. She was going to die. And there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Maybe I should have died that night. The doctors said it was a miracle I survived. I don't remember much, just headlights, a sudden impact, and the feeling of weightlessness before everything went dark. They told me later that my heart stopped for 3 minutes before they revived me. 3 whole minutes where I was clinically dead. I should have never woken up. But I did. And when I did, something changed. At first, I thought it was just the trauma. The headaches, the weird dreams, the sense of something watching me. But then the dreams became waking nightmares. I started seeing them. Shadowy figures, always standing behind people. Silent. Motionless. Waiting. And every single time I saw one, the person they stood behind was dead within a few days. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the mind. Maybe some leftover damage from the accident. But then the deaths started piling up, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The first time it happened, I convinced myself it was a coincidence. It was a man at the grocery store, standing in line ahead of me. He was talking to the cashier, laughing about something, completely oblivious to the thing looming behind him. I blinked. It was still there. Thin. Shadowy. Too tall, too stretched, like a silhouette that wasn't shaped right. No one else reacted to it. No one even seemed to notice. I told myself I was seeing things. 2 days later, that man was in the news. Died in a freak accident. Fell down the stairs in his own home, snapped his neck. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? Hey, I saw a shadow behind him at the grocery store, and now he's dead. They'd think I was crazy. I tried to forget it, until it happened again, and again, and again. Now, every time I go outside, I see them. And every time I see one, I know someone is about to die. Just like I knew she was going to die. I didn't know her name. Never saw her before that moment. But the second my eyes landed on her, I knew. She was sitting at a bus stop, headphones in, scrolling through her phone. It was late, too late for someone to be out alone. But she looked calm, unaware of what was behind her. I wasn't. A shadow stood directly behind her. Tall. Thin. Wrong. It didn't move. Didn't breathe. It just stood there, its head tilted slightly, as if whispering something into her ear. I wanted to believe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe a trick of the streetlights, a shadow from a nearby tree, anything that made sense. But I had seen this before, and I knew what it meant. She was going to die. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. I had never tried to stop it before, never had the courage. But if I just walked away now, I'd see her face on the news tomorrow. I forced myself forward. Hey, I said, voice shaky. Hey, excuse me. She didn't hear me. I stepped closer. The shadow loomed over her, still motionless, but I felt its presence, like the air around it was colder. Miss, I tried again. She finally looked up, pulling out an earbud. Huh. I opened my mouth to warn her, but then, the shadow moved. It turned toward me. My blood went cold. It had never done that before. For a long, horrible second, it just stared. Its face, if it even had one, was nothing but shifting darkness. But I felt its eyes. It was looking right at me. And then, it took a step forward. Not toward her. Toward me. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the curb. The thing followed, its movements slow but deliberate. No. This wasn't supposed to happen. I turned and bolted. I didn't stop running until my lungs burned, until the bus stop was far behind me, until I was sure it wasn't chasing me anymore. When I finally dared to check my phone, my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I didn't have to look at the news. I already knew. The next morning, she was dead. Hit by a car. died on impact. And I had a bigger problem now. Because the shadow I saw that night, it had followed me home. 2 days later, I found myself walking through the same park, my mind still racing with confusion and fear. I couldn't shake what had happened. I kept telling myself it was a coincidence. I had to. I needed to feel normal again. But then I saw her. Another woman sitting on a bench, her head down, her shoulders slumped. She looked exhausted, like she was weighed down by something I couldn't see. Maybe she was going through something tough. I didn't know. But I knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to make it through the night. It was like I could smell the death in the air. The shadow was near. I tried to shake it off. I was walking away. I didn't want to do this. But something in my gut told me I had to warn her. I turned back, and there it was. The shadow. This one was taller than the last. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, its body a mass of darkness. I felt its presence even before I saw it. It wasn't behind her anymore. It was beside her, almost like it was guarding her. I froze. I couldn't stop myself. I had to say something. I had to warn her, even if it made me seem crazy. "Excuse me," I shouted. She didn't hear me. I rushed closer, my legs moving before I could even think. The closer I got, the colder the air felt. My heart raced in my chest. "Hey, you need to get up," I said, more urgently this time. "You're in danger." "You don't." But before I could finish, the woman slowly turned her head and looked at me with empty eyes. I froze. Her face, it was blank, like someone had erased everything from it. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. It felt like the whole world had stopped. My vision blurred, and then, the shadow moved. In one smooth motion, it reached out with a hand that seemed too long, too dark, too wrong. It touched her, and then, she vanished. Just like that. She was there 1 second, and the next, nothing. I blinked, trying to process what had just happened. The bench was empty. There was no sign of her. Just the shadow, standing perfectly still, its head tilted, watching me. I stepped back, my pulse hammering in my ears. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't listen. I couldn't take my eyes off that thing. The shadow shifted, its form blurring and twisting as it moved closer to me. I raised my hands, almost instinctively, as if I could push it back. But then, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around. It wasn't the shadow behind me. It was her. The woman. She was standing there, looking exactly as she had before she vanished. Blank eyes, empty face. But something was wrong. Her movements were stiff, unnatural, like she wasn't even in control of her body. I opened my mouth to scream, but she stepped forward and touched me. The woman's grip was icy, her touch like steel. I tried to pull away, but she wouldn't let go. Behind her, the shadow moved again. It stretched out, towering over us. I could feel its cold, pressing in. The air felt thick, like it was choking me. I pushed her hand off me, but she didn't fight back. Her face was still blank, like she wasn't in control. I backed away, stumbling as I turned to run. Then the shadow lunged. I barely had time to react. It was faster than anything I'd ever seen. Its long arms shot out, grabbing me. I tried to break free, kicking, punching, but it felt like hitting stone. The cold was unbearable. Suddenly, the woman appeared in front of me again. She was different this time, her body stiff, like she was being controlled. She reached out to touch me again, her fingers like knives. I dodged, but she was too quick. Her hand grazed my arm, and the skin burned where she touched me. I looked up, desperate, but everything was a blur. The world around me seemed to twist, bending like it wasn't real. I tried to focus, but my head spun. The shadow squeezed tighter. I gasped, struggling for air, my body aching from the pressure. I was almost out of breath. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the grip loosened. I fell to the ground, coughing, gasping for air. My heart was racing. I could barely think straight. But when I looked up, the woman was gone. The shadow was gone. I was alone again. But not really. I could feel them. I didn't know how, but I could feel them watching me. I looked around, but there was nothing there. Suddenly, a cold breath swept over me. I whipped around to see the shadow standing just behind me. It hadn't gone anywhere. It was waiting. I bolted. My feet slammed against the ground as I ran, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I could feel it behind me, getting closer, stretching its long arms toward me. I reached the street, but there was no escape. The shadows were everywhere now, surrounding me. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran straight into the road, ignoring the cars, the danger. The roar of traffic filled my ears as I sprinted across the road, barely dodging a car that screeched to a halt. My heart pounded, my legs burning, but the shadow was still behind me. It didn't slow down. It wasn't human. I wasn't sure if it was even alive. I darted into an alley, hoping for some sort of cover. But the moment I entered, the shadows followed, spilling down the walls like liquid darkness. There was nowhere to hide. I skidded to a stop when I saw it. The woman. She stood at the end of the alley, her body stiff and unmoving, her eyes empty. It was like she was waiting for me to approach. I didn't want to get any closer, but I had no choice. I backed up, every instinct screaming to run, but the alley was closing in. The shadows from behind me reached out, wrapping around my legs, pulling me toward her. "Please," I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her head, and in that moment, I realized she wasn't controlling the shadow. She was being controlled by it. The shadow surged forward, swallowing her up, her body twisting as if being pulled into some other dimension. She screamed, a sound that didn't belong in this world. The scream was cut short, and just like that, she was gone. I froze in place, terror freezing me to the spot. The shadow hovered in front of me, shifting, growing taller, dark tendrils writhing like snakes. It wasn't finished yet. It was hungry. With a sudden burst of strength, I tore away, stumbling backward. My hands scraped against the wet ground as I tried to get back to my feet. But the shadow was relentless. It was everywhere now, the air heavy, pressing against my chest like I was suffocating. I had to get out of there. I had to escape. A sound, a car engine. My heart skipped a beat. I looked up, and through the thickening darkness, I saw headlights. A car was coming. I ran toward the road again, praying that the driver saw me. The car screeched to a stop just in time, its horn blaring. I jumped in, and before I could even thank the driver, the car sped off, my body still trembling from the chase. I glanced back out the rearview mirror. The shadow was there, but it stopped. It watched as we drove away, but it didn't follow. For now, I slumped back into the seat, trying to steady my breath, but the adrenaline was still coursing through me. I didn't know if I was safe yet, but the shadow hadn't followed. For now, that was the only thing that mattered. I turned to the driver, a man, maybe in his 30s, with wide eyes, his knuckles tight on the wheel. "What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice shaking. I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't even sure what that was. The woman? The shadow? Was it some kind of nightmare? "Just keep driving," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. "Please, just drive." He didn't argue. He pressed harder on the gas, the city lights flickering past us as we sped through the streets. The car's engine roared. "I have to get home," I said, gripping the seat. I just have to make sure I'm safe." The driver nodded. "Where's home?" I gave him the name of my street, but when he turned onto the main road, it didn't feel right. The darkness seemed to stretch out farther, almost swallowing the city whole. The lights that had once felt like a safety net now looked dim, like they were too far away to matter. The car slowed as we approached a red light, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing by the sidewalk. A woman. I knew it was her. I couldn't see her face, but I felt it. That presence. The same cold, empty stare. The shadow. It was watching from behind her. "Stop the car," I shouted, panic rising in my chest. "Don't stop. Don't." But it was too late. The woman turned, and the shadow followed, its long limbs stretching out as it moved closer to the car. The driver didn't even see it. He didn't know what I was looking at, but I did. I reached for the door handle, my mind a blur of terror. "Go, go, go." He didn't wait. He slammed his foot on the pedal, and the car jerked forward, But the shadow wasn't just standing there anymore. It moved. The darkness blurred, stretching toward us, faster than any person could move. I could feel it coming closer, its coldness seeping into the car, even as we sped away. I looked back through the rearview mirror, my stomach dropping when I saw the woman. She was still there, staring, her blank eyes locked onto mine. But now, the shadow was merging with her. It was inside her. A scream tore from my throat as I tried to look away, but I couldn't. The shadow was in the woman, and it was coming for me. The driver turned to me, his face pale. "What the hell is going on? What's happening to her?" "I don't know," I yelled. "Just drive. Faster." The car sped through the streets, but I could feel the darkness creeping up behind us, getting closer. I turned again, watching as the woman stepped into the street in front of us. She didn't move like a person anymore. She was something else, something wrong. Her limbs were jerky, stiff, unnatural. And then, as the car approached her, the shadow expanded out, a wave of blackness reaching for us. "Watch out!" I screamed. But it was too late. The car slammed into the woman with a sickening thud. I screamed, my heart pounding, as we skidded to a halt. I thought we hit her. I thought we ran her over. But when I looked at the front window, there was nothing there. No body. No blood. Just the empty street ahead. Did you see that?" The driver gasped, his hands trembling on the wheel. I couldn't speak. My throat was dry. My body was frozen in fear. My eyes darted back to the rearview mirror. There she was, standing right behind us now, in the reflection, her eyes locked onto mine. But she was different. Her body was more twisted, the shadow more inside her. She wasn't even fully human anymore. The air around the car grew colder. I could feel it pressing against the windows, the chill creeping into my bones. I could still hear that voice in my head, that cold, hollow whisper. "You can't escape." The driver was shaking. "What the hell is going on? What's happening to us?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The words didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. The woman, she wasn't just some person anymore. She was something worse. And whatever she had become, whatever they were coming for me. For both of us. Suddenly, the car started to slow down, like the engine was losing power. The lights of the street seemed to dim, flickering like they were about to go out completely. "What's happening? Why are we stopping?" The driver panicked, his foot pressing harder on the gas, but the car wouldn't respond. I looked out the side window. The shadow. It was right there. It was no longer hiding behind her. The blackness of it seemed to stretch across the entire street, swallowing everything in its path. The shadows of the buildings twisted unnaturally, as if the darkness was alive, bending toward the car. The woman stepped forward, her stiff movements jerky and mechanical. The shadow shifted with her, as if it was tethered to her every step. She reached out for the car. The windows rattled as if something was pushing against them. My breath fogged up the glass as I tried to breathe through the panic. I grabbed the door handle, but before I could even think of getting out, the woman's fingers tapped against the window. The touch felt wrong. Her skin wasn't real anymore. It was as if it was just a thin layer over something else, something cold and empty. The air inside the car grew heavier, suffocating. I couldn't think. My chest was tight. I couldn't even scream anymore. I turned to the driver. "We need to leave. Now." But he wasn't responding. He was staring straight ahead, his eyes wide, unblinking. His hands were clenched around the wheel, but he wasn't moving. It was like he was frozen in place. Then, slowly, his head turned toward me. His face was pale, his lips trembling, his eyes pitch black. "Get out of the car," he whispered. The way he said it, it wasn't a request. It was an order. It wasn't him speaking anymore. The shadow had taken him. Without thinking, I opened the door and bolted out of the car, my feet barely touching the ground as I ran. The city was still, too still, as I sprinted through the streets. I could hear the echoes of footsteps behind me, her footsteps. I didn't dare look back. I kept running, my breath ragged in my chest. The city streets were empty, a ghost town. But I could hear the footsteps, slow, deliberate, growing closer. My heart pounded. The shadow was getting closer. She was still with me, still trailing. But then something shifted. The air around me seemed to hum, vibrating with energy I didn't understand. My fingers tingled, and a sharp, sudden force pushed against my chest. Without warning, I stopped. I couldn't keep running. I could feel it now. Something was inside me. It wasn't the shadow. It was me. My hands clenched into fists, and a jolt of power surged through my veins. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it, raw, uncontrolled. The air grew heavier as though it was drawn to me, waiting for something to happen. I could see it, in the corner of my vision, the shadow, waiting, as though it knew. Then I turned to face it. "Why are you following me?" I shouted into the silence. The words felt wrong coming from my mouth, but I couldn't stop them. The shadow didn't respond. It was still, just watching me from the darkness. But then, there was a shift. It moved closer, its form darkening, swirling, like smoke swirling in a storm. It wasn't just a presence anymore, it was something more tangible, and it seemed to be testing me. I felt the power in me, thrumming, building. My pulse raced, but it wasn't from fear anymore. The shadow moved again, but I raised my hand, instinctively. The ground beneath me trembled slightly. The shadow recoiled, its form warping as though the air itself was rejecting it. I didn't know how I did it, but I did it. And the shadow knew. It hesitated, before shifting forward again, but slower, as though it was learning. I raised my hand higher. The power surged again, more intense now. It was like a magnet pulling the darkness toward me, something ancient and unspoken. "I don't know who or what you are," I said, voice steady, "but you're not in control anymore." The shadow seemed to grow, its form extending toward me, like it was stretching to engulf me. It wasn't just following me now, it was testing me. But before I could process any of it, a voice broke through the silence. It was soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind, but it grew louder, clearer. "You've done well, so far." I froze. The voice, it didn't belong to anyone I knew. It was like a chorus of whispers, each one overlapping the other, filling the space around me. I turned in circles, trying to locate its source. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the shock running through me. A shadow shifted. It wasn't like before. This time, the darkness seemed to take shape, pulling around a figure that was both there and not there. Its outline flickered, as though it was made of liquid night. "You really don't remember, do you?" The voice chuckled, low and haunting. My heart skipped a beat. "Remember what?" The figure stepped closer, its form becoming clearer with every step. A tall, shadowy entity with no distinct features, only an outline, its shape constantly shifting as if it was unsure of itself. Yet, I could feel its presence. It was powerful, ancient. "You've always had this power," it said, "but you've been blind to it. Until now." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Power? What are you talking about?" The shadow's form flickered, almost like it was amused by my confusion. "You're not just an ordinary human. You're a conduit, an anchor between this world and ours. We've been waiting for you to realize it." A cold chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? Why me?" The figure tilted its head, the motion unnerving. "You were born for this. Your bloodline carries the legacy of the ancients. That's why we've been following you. It was never about the shadow or us coming after you. It was about you coming into your own." I shook my head. "So, what now? What do you want from me?" The shadow seemed to laugh, though there was no sound. "We don't want anything. We're already here. But you can wield what you've discovered. What you just tapped into, it's only the beginning." The darkness around me seemed to pulse, like it was alive, thrumming with energy. It was both overwhelming and inviting. "You could join us," it continued. "Embrace what you are, and there are no limits. Power beyond anything you've ever imagined. All you need to do is accept it." I clenched my fists, trying to process what it was offering. A part of me wanted to refuse, to run. But there was another part, a part deep inside, that felt the pull, the allure of something more, something beyond the mundane. "And if I refused?" I asked, my voice shaky, but determined. The shadow's form darkened, its edges growing sharper, like knives. "Then we will wait. Until you're ready. You don't have a choice in the matter, human." This power is yours, whether you like it or not. The word struck me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what to make of it. My mind raced. I looked at the figure, the shifting darkness, and took a slow step forward. "Fine," I said, my voice steady now, more confident than I'd felt in a long time. "Tell me what I need to do." The shadow stretched out, swirling around me, its form finally stilling. "Welcome to your true self." Suddenly, I felt something shift inside me, something unlocked. The power surged through me again, stronger, like a flood breaking free. It felt alive, like I could control it, bend it to my will. For the first time, I felt unstoppable. I took a deep breath, feeling the power inside me. The shadows around me seemed to wait, like they were ready for what I'd do next. I raised my hand, and the shadows moved with me. It felt like I could control them. I focused harder, and the shadows formed into a shape, floating just above my hand. It was amazing. The more I focused, the more they listened. I didn't fully understand it, but I could feel the power in me. I turned toward the nearest building. The lights flickered, and I held out my hand. The shadows stretched, covering the building. It was like a thick wall of darkness, stopping anything from getting through. I focused hard, feeling the energy rise in me. The shadows around me seemed to stretch, responding to my thoughts. I raised both hands, and the darkness wrapped around them like liquid. With a deep breath, I thrust my arms forward, sending the power shooting out. A wave of dark energy blasted from me, tearing through the street. The ground cracked open where the blast hit, and buildings shook, windows shattering as the force of it spread. I felt the rush, like a storm inside me. The air turned cold, and the shadows seemed to dance, following the path I made. The energy left me feeling drained but alive, like something inside me had finally clicked. I looked around. The street was in chaos. The concrete was cracked, and smoke rose from the broken buildings. But there was a feeling of power, of control, that hadn't been there before. "That's incredible," I whispered to myself, amazed at what I'd just done. I turned toward the wreckage I'd created. The shadows moved with me, like they were still listening. I didn't feel afraid anymore. I had found my strength, and now it was mine to control.